Yes, thank you, Rocco, for a very interesting tour de force or tour d'horizon. I was reflecting on this as you talked, that is there enough community, is there enough of a common community for participation to be meaningful in many modern democracies? In 1798, Napoleon sailed into Valletta and told the French Knights of the Order of Malta. I'm a member of that order, and I think of it today because there's a new Grand Master just elected this afternoon. And Napoleon could say, come to me because you're French. And before that, they were serving Christendom as a community, at least in the sort of idealized history of things. And the nation state seems to have had its heyday, because today there are all these projects of minority rights, group rights, what we call multicultural society and so on. So participation, as Margaret talked about earlier, makes little sense unless there is, in a way, unless it is more than just power projection, that participation has to be directed at something that is common for there to be a political community. Otherwise it becomes just a sort of attempt to project power. So, and you just said it's Italy first, nation state. This is not the sort of politically correct language anymore, but what kind of community can we have in our democracies today in order to make participation directed at the common good? I don't expect you to have an answer, but perhaps a good reflection.
Well, first of all, I think we should start with the person. Which kind of person must we have? Because we have a lot of interest groups. It is good. I recall my dialogues with Chiara Lubich. I told her, well, politics it is true, politics is for unity, but politics produces unity through conflict. There is a group, we organize a group, we want to defend something that we consider to be good, and we enter into a conflict with others. That's good. Because when conflict is represented, then a mediation can be found. And through this mediation, we create a broader unity. Two conflicting groups converge on one point and enter into a conflict with other groups, and this will bring to further moments of unity. So I do not condemn the fact that people gather and they produce necessarily conflict. The problem is we enter into the conflict with the intention of finding a common solution and creating a broader unity, or we enter into the conflict with the purpose of obtaining what we want and the hell what happens to others. I see with preoccupation a growing tendency to adopt this second attitude. United States first. Of course, if I were a citizen of United States, I would say United States first. Kennedy taught, he did not say it, but he taught United States first. Eisenhower taught United States first. Reagan taught United States first. Why not? But it taught that he had to formulate the interest of United States within a broader context that in the end could be, perhaps not quite, depends. In any case, it was broader. It included the European nations and perhaps even humanity at large, mankind at large. And the great effect of Pacem in Terris was to push in the direction of a formulation of a common interest of mankind, within which there was conflict between Russia and United States, and within the coalition of the United States between different European countries, of course. But all these conflicts had to be oriented towards an accommodation that defines a common interest. Now the problem is, are we running the risk of losing this perspective? Are we running the risk that some countries, for instance, who are afraid of being impoverished or just of losing a part of their social, political, economic, military power, will prefer the struggle to the compromise. We stop looking for reasonable compromises. Are we producing a general culture of that has a political character, or are we shifting to a non-political idea? That is the idea of Carl Schmitt, but before Carl Schmitt, it is the idea of that is attributed to Clausewitz. That's not right, because Clausewitz was much better. But in any way, that not politics, but war is the normal condition in the relations among nations and among social groups and among peoples. That is the issue. I am not afraid of conflict. Conflict is good if it is regulated. And regulated means that we know that we struggle with one another to find a solution in which I prevail, but you can live. If, on the contrary, we want a solution in which I prevail and you die, and so I don't, and the winner does not take into account the point of view of the loser, if we go back to the struggle of the slave and the master in Hegel's phenomenology, then we lose the tremendous advance that we have had, starting with Pacem in Terris. Because Pacem in Terris was not only an event in the history of the Catholic Church, it was an event in the history of mankind. And from Pacem in Terris up to today, I don't know if tomorrow, this has been the general framework in which we have thought the United Nations, with all the defects of United Nations. I'm not an admirer of United Nations. I think the United Nations is the worst possible organization of mankind, with the exception of all others we have known up to now. So if we find a better one, very well. But if we have to go back to the time when we had no general organization of mankind, let us keep the United Nations. I don't know if I caught the sense of your question.
We have several questions in the queue, so could you introduce yourself, sir? Yes.
Lukona Mnguni from South Africa, PhD student under Professor Zulu. There is a regression that is happening in democracies generally. I am worried that the focus is now turning towards regression that is happening in some Western democracies, and there's going to be less focus happening towards those states that which we still want to see democratizing. So you have a situation where the underrepresented people, for example, in the African continent, are actually the majority, the young people. So there's many young people, but they do not have a voice in these political processes. And their participation, and probably elsewhere in the world, participatory democracy is being abused to reproduce ideas of the elites, where it's a tick box exercise that we took this legislation for public consultation, but really what the attitudes of the majority of the public are towards that piece of legislation are neither here nor there. It will still be taken and put through processes. Now, the idea of fraternity is, for me, appealing because it has a possibility to temper with that majoritarian culture, whether it is in senates, in parliaments, and so on. But I'm starting to wonder if a fraternity isn't itself an ideological positioning. And how do you build a critical mass in praxis for this fraternity? Because to think of it as an all-encompassing that can sort of put under one umbrella all of humanity with all its ideological differences is probably a bit of a utopia. The reality is that fraternity is an ideological positioning that is contesting with other ideas on how to organize society. So away from the civil society space, away from just sort of neutral spaces, how do you translate this call for fraternity into the political process?
Excellent question. Rocco.
Well, I have two answers. I think one answer is already being given, and the second one may be clarified now. The first answer is, what is the mother of fraternity? Families. For most people, what is the place in which we really make the experience of the self-giving of oneself in order to create a community. It is the fact that we fall in love, we get married, we have children. This is the beginning. Here we receive the fundamental archetypes. Then, more or less, some more, some less, these archetypes can be brought out of the family, also in the relation to the general social environment. So if fraternity is not to be an ideology, first of all, fraternity means we have to strengthen families. And this means policies that strengthen families, not only with economic support also, but also giving to them the cultural dignity they should have in the life of society. Second, I think of the church, because fraternity becomes a reality through institutions. And the first institution through which in my personal experience, I try to make fraternity real is the church. Not the church here, the Vatican, my parish church. The people with whom I try to create relations, a community in which other people can be accepted and in which we help each other and are ready to help others and to mobilize us for social action when it is needed, in the forms in which it is needed. And then, of course, you may have many other levels in which communities are connected with one another. You have church movements, you have non-church movements that mobilize church groups and non-church groups all together for some specific social purposes, and you contribute to creating a vibrant civil society, because fraternity is the expression of a vibrant civil society. But what is crucial is that nothing of this happens if you do not start with persons. To start with persons means there is a lot of people who are willing to be the generals of the army of the vibrant civil society. Very few people who want to be the soldiers. To be the soldiers means I give a part of my time or a part of my money or both for some social purposes that I identify in my neighborhood, or even not just in the neighborhood, far away, but I, in front of a social demand, I do not say the state should do. I and my friends start doing something. Then we go to the state and put political pressure and tell to the state, you have to help us, because what we are doing is good for society.
Okay. Professor Benkler.
I feel like I could spend hours in questions for such a rich and interesting talk. But your talk raised for me one question about this academy and about social science and its limits. Because you end with Machiavelli and the requirement of laying out the options and the arguments for them. And you start with the person and participatory democracy as requiring a person, and you have a particular developmental theory of the person through the family. And then you hypothesize that the development of the person requires a particular kind of family, which is highly contested in contemporary society. How open, and what is the relationship between the state of social science, which is only now beginning to have enough data to answer the question about what kind of person emerges from a stable, loving, same-sex family that was not available before? How open to social science is that? What is the relationship between a doctrinal commitment and the newly emerging possibilities of social science?
I am completely open to the result of empirical research, and the question should not be asked to me, but to the prominent sociologists that give us the honor of their participation. I can rely on personal experience and on the data that I have. What's wrong? Time. I have just started speaking. But if you take, for instance, one old work of the social sciences, the authoritarian personality, the great research of Theodor Wiesengrund Adorno in the 50s, you find there a quite interesting theoretical presentation of these arguments with a certain empirical support. Is it still valid in the world of today? I don't know. But my personal experience confirms that the fundamental data of Adorno remains actual. If you want another point of reference, it is, I am the happy husband of a psychoanalyst, and not only Freud, but also to a large extent the development of the psychoanalytical studies after Freud confirmed the centrality of the family that has one father, one mother, the child.
Okay.
And the fact that the family creates the personality, interiorizing the person of the father and the person of the mother.
Okay. All right.
But if there are other empirical data, I am ready to consider them.